The new HTML5 form fields and attributes. This video was made on the assumption that you have mastered basic HTML programming. With the arrival of HTML5, the forms gain some news. But be aware that some of these fields do not work on all browsers. The ideal is to test them in as many browsers as possible before adding them to your website pages. First, I'm going to talk about the fields, and then about the attributes. Some of these fields have an automatic validation system, which will greatly facilitate the lives of developers, as we will no longer need to implement form validation in JavaScript. This will reduce the time and labor. See how this form is rendered in the Chrome browser. Now, let's see this code more closely. The email input field can take text input and validate that the data is a valid email address. The URL field can take text input and validate that the data is a valid URL. The number field can take numeric text input and validate that the data is a valid number. The browser may assist the user by showing a numeric keyboard, for example, on a mobile phone. The range fields are used like number fields, but instead of having an arrow up and down to select the value, you have a slider. The tel fields are used for telephone numbers. Unlike the number field, a tel field can contain spaces in between the numbers, but still no letters. The search fields are used for input to website searches. The search fields can show a history of previous search terms to make searching easier. Note, the browser may refresh the page when you click enter, but then scroll down to the search field, try typing in the first letter of your previous search term, and see what suggestions the browser gives you. The date field can take text input and validate that the data is a valid date. The time field can take text input and validate that the data is a valid time. Time fields allow set hours between 0 and 23, and minutes between 0 and 59. The date time field can take text input and validate that the data is a valid date and time. The month field can take text input and validate that the data is a valid month. Months can be between 1 and 12. The browser may also assist the user in picking up a month by showing a list of months in a textual representation localized to the user's own language. The week field can take text input and validate that the data is a valid week. Weeks can be between 1 and 53. The browser may also assist the user in picking up a valid week by showing a calendar widget of some kind. Some years have 52 weeks, and some years have 53. The browser could assure that the chosen week number actually exists in the given year. The color fields are used to select colors, for instance, in a drawing program. The combo box field is really just a text field where you can associate a list of options to it. Notice the list attribute of the input field. The value of the list attribute is the ID of the data list element. This way, the browser knows that the data list element should be associated with the input field and used as options for auto-completion of the text written in the text field. The data list element contains a list of option elements, which each contain a value attribute. The value attribute is the value of that option, used in auto-completion option, when the user types text into the text field. You can also use the list attribute and data list element with input field of type email and URL too. The data list must have a closing tag. Now, let's talk about the attributes. The autofocus attribute enables you to specify which field should be given focus automatically. When the page is loaded, you should have only one such field on any given page, for instance, a search field, or one of the fields in a login box. The autofocus attribute can be used with any type of form field. The placeholder attribute provides a way to specify a value to show in a form field before the user types anything into the field. Once the user starts typing, the placeholder value disappears. The placeholder attribute can be used with any form field that takes text input. The required attribute specifies that a given attribute is required. This means that the form cannot be submitted until a value has been entered into the given field. Notice that you don't have to provide a value for the attribute, its presence is enough. The multiple attribute signals that multiple values are allowed in this field. For instance, an email field could then contain multiple email addresses separated by commas. The multiple attribute also works with file upload fields, allowing the user to upload multiple files. The pattern attributes enables you to specify a regular expression pattern that a text type into a given input field must match. I will not explain regular expressions here. If you want to master regular expressions, so start learning an object-oriented programming language. This example sets a pattern that matches one character between A and Z and a number between 0 and 9. The regular expression syntax used is the same as for JavaScript, but with an implicit circumflex accent at the beginning and a $sign at the end. These two characters match the beginning and end of the input, but now you don't need to add them every time. The autocomplete attribute can be used to signal to the browser that it is okay to autocomplete the given input field. This is most likely not an attribute that you will use a lot. The minimum and maximum attributes restrict the input allowed for an input field. You can use these attributes to, for example, set the minimum and maximum number allowed for a number field, or the minimum and maximum date allowed in a date field. You do not need to have both a minimum and a maximum attribute. You can also have just one of them, either the minimum or maximum attribute. The step attribute is used to set how much will increase, for example, number or range fields increment amount, with each click on the arrow buttons, or movement of the slider. The step attribute can also be used with date fields, with the value any, to specify that the time can be set with very fine granularity, for example, milliseconds. The form attribute is used to associate form fields with a form element. They are not nested inside. Notice the last range field, it is placed outside the form element. The form attribute of the range field is pointing to the ID of the form element. That way, the browser knows that this input field belongs to that form, even if the input field is not nested inside the form element. Well, our tutorial is coming to the end. If you have any question, leave it on the comments, I will answer all of them. If you like this kind of content, just rate and subscribe. Thanks for watching this video so far, goodbye.